Hello and welcome to episode 108 of the online course Creator Show. Today I am talking about this podcast, actually, in my journey of getting to 100 episodes. So obviously this is episode 108. I hit episode 100 smack bang in the middle of my launch, which was not intentional, but that's just the way it worked out. And I didn't really have time to talk about it in depth at the time. You can go back and listen to episode 100 if you want. It was about hitting 100 episodes, but also mainly where I dove deep into Moneymakers, the program, and talked all about that. So that was the main focus of it. And I feel like I didn't really get the chance to talk about it in depth. And so I wanted to do so today, really, because I have learned so much from this podcast, and this podcast has given me so much, but it hasn't been an easy journey. And basically when I started this podcast, in a lot of ways, I felt like I was starting from nothing. And I think that might resonate with a lot of you. And, because if you're trying to create a course or trying to build a business and you currently don't have anything in place, you don't have any assets created, like you don't have the course yet, you don't have your podcast yet, you don't have your one-on-one practice yet, whatever it looks like for you, it can feel like a very, very big mountain to climb. And I wanted to share these lessons with you that I've learned from the podcast because I think they are pretty universal in business. And I think that every single lessons that I can share, so I'm sharing 10 lessons from 100 podcast episodes. I think that all of these apply to everyone's business in some way, shape or form, right? So I wanted to share them because I think they are really, really relevant. But 10 lessons, I sat down and really thought about this. I've been thinking about this for a while. I have actually been planning this episode for a number of weeks, possibly even longer than that, maybe 2 months. And I have really thought about what 100 episodes has taught me. So my goal right from the start of this podcast was to hit 100 episodes. That being my primary goal, it was quite strange when I actually hit 100. I'm like, what now? Am I going to change it? And am I going to work on improving it? Or am I going to walk away? Because obviously I'd hit that goal. Really, what's come about as I've hit the 100 episode mark is, no, I'm not doing any of those things. I'm sure I'm always trying to improve the show. But for me, it was just proving to myself that I could do something to this extent. Because when I started producing or recording this podcast, 100 episodes felt like a lot. And there's some crazy stats around. I can't quite remember them, actually. I'm going to be brutally honest about that. I think it's something like most podcasts don't get past 7 episodes. So sure, there's a lot of podcasts out there, but there's not that many that are actually active. So, you would have noticed that a lot of people just stop podcasting as well. It is a big commitment to have a podcast. And for me, it has absolutely paid off, but it's definitely taught me a lot along the way. I also recorded a podcast when I hit 50 episodes. So it was the same kind of topic, right? Like what I've learned from 50 podcast episodes. And I have consciously decided for this episode that I haven't gone back and re-listened to that episode first because I wanted this reflection of the lessons that I've learned from 100 podcast episodes not to be influenced by that. So I will link that episode in the show notes. And if you want to go back and listen to it, you absolutely can. I have made that decision not to for myself. So when I planned out this podcast, I really looked at the 100 episodes as a whole. So the first lesson, and I think this is the biggest lesson that I've actually had from creating this show, which started off with no listeners, just like when we're starting anything new. So the biggest lesson has been how you operate when things aren't working very much matters and will dictate your future success, right? So at the start, I had very, very low download numbers at the start, and 1 month there in 2022. So I started this podcast in 2022. I think it was mid-2022. I'm not sure what month. And I'm not sure if I actually released that many episodes that month, but one month I had 35 listeners, not just for one episode, but for the entire month. That is so low, incredibly low, right? And the thing that I have really learned is you can't let that stuff stop you. And I didn't let it stop me. And now I have a completely different show, a completely different situations where I have that many listeners within the first 5 minutes of dropping an episode. So sometimes our results are going to be slow. Sometimes we're going to get low numbers right from the start, at the start. And that's kind of normal. And while, yes, that could be an indication that your show isn't that good or people aren't interested in the topic or anything like that, sometimes you actually need to give things more of a chance. And fortunately, I did that. I'm now in a situation where, as I mentioned, the downloads are a heck of a lot higher than that. People are reaching out to me because of my podcast. People are approaching me to be guests on my podcast. And I'm very, very, very fussy about who I let on the show, by the way. And like most people, I say no to, not because there's anything wrong with them, but because it's just not a fit for the listeners to the show. It's amazing how many people pitch me who don't even look into what the show's about. Anyway, you don't get to have something like this podcast if you give up at the first sign of the numbers not being what you want, or it not being fast enough, or it not being big enough straight out of the gate. Okay, so where are you giving up too soon because the results have not been immediate? And I say this all the time with online courses, and yeah, you've just really got to stick at it. So that's the biggest lesson number one that I have learned from the show. The second lesson I have learned, and I've particularly learned this more lately, is that the volume in which you put out there in terms of content will get you further faster. And now this is kind of obvious, right? But it needs to be said. So if you really want results faster, then do more in terms of how many episodes you're putting out there. If you want your social media to grow faster, then do more posts. It really is about quantity. And I think that the quality can come later. You've really just got to get in the rhythm of putting more content out there, and then you get feedback, you get data that is going to tell you what people are resonating with and what's working, what's not, that kind of thing. And then you get to focus more on quality. But at the start, if you are not doing volume, then it's just going to be slow, right? I have to say this is something that I've really, really learned probably in about episode 85 to 100. Now, the funny thing is that period of time was when I noticed some big shifts with this podcast, okay? So some of the stuff won't be in that, what I learned in 50 episode that I just mentioned, because I really learnt this quite far in the piece. And that is just also so interesting, is that sometimes the lessons don't stop the further towards your goal or even past your goal that you get, because the lessons will continue, but they're just different lessons. They're like higher level lessons. So during my launch that I had in May, I produced way more episodes than I normally would. I was doing 2 or 3 a week. And that was one of my biggest download months that I've ever had on this podcast because of the volume, right? So more volume, faster results, reaching that goal, whatever it is. And I have absolutely toyed with the idea of doing 2 podcasts a week because I want to get further faster, right? I want to keep growing this podcast. And that's not something that I've made a final decision on yet, because obviously it's a big commitment, right? But that is definitely something that I have looked at. So volume of output will get you the results faster. So how does this apply to you? Literally do more, launch more often, show up more online on your chosen social media platform, do more YouTube videos, whatever that means for you. If you are dreaming of that big goal, the more that you do, the faster you're going to get there. And you might be thinking, oh my God, what if I burn out? I don't want to hustle. And that's all well and good. There are ways to do this without hustling or burning out, I promise you. Especially if you are aligned with where you're going and your why is big enough. I think fulfillment is such an important part of this conversation. Now, the next lesson that I have learned is that the results don't always come at the same time as you're putting in all the effort. So sometimes, we put in all this effort, maybe we do more volume or whatever, we really have like a focus on doing the work and we want instant results. So what I've noticed with this podcast in particular is I can do like a big output month where I'm doing more episodes than normal, and I may not see the instant result from that. Like, sure, the numbers will be higher initially, but my biggest download months, actually some of those months I haven't actually launched that many episodes, or maybe even none at all. But the beauty of podcasting, this is another lesson that I'll get to in a bit, is that This isn't like social media where you post something and within 12 hours, 24 hours, it's disappeared. People will still listen to episode 1. The results in terms of download numbers don't always come straight away. And also with something like a podcast, you're building trust, you're building connection, and people sometimes are going to listen or follow you or even take part in your free launch events for years before they actually decide to work with you, okay? So the results don't come at the same time. Like I said, this is related to download months, but I think it relates to revenue, all of that kind of stuff as well. So sometimes it doesn't happen straight away, but the work that you do back then cumulatively contributes to results later down the track. So the next lesson, and this is one that I have just touched on briefly, is that long form content has a certain type of leverage that short form content just does not have and cannot replace. So most episodes of my show still get listened to, even episode number 1. I have had people reach out to me and said, just found your podcast, listen to episode number 1, love your story, really resonate with you. How can I work with you and sign up to become a client? And then say, look, like my next step is, while we're working together, I'm going to go through every single episode of your show from episode number 2 all the way up to my latest episode. So there's like a real evergreen element with this type of content, and it doesn't disappear. And like that episode number 1, I recorded it in January 2022. Like that is over 3 years ago now, and people are still listening to it. Like I can look at my podcast downloads on an app on my phone and I can see what people are listening to. And those older episodes will quite often pop up as the top listened to episode of that day. So I think that everyone should have some kind of long form content in their business that is either a podcast, it's a YouTube channel where you're doing longer videos, or it could be a blog, something like that. Like you've got to choose which one is right for you. But I highly recommend that you have some form of long form content. And then the beauty of that is you can create one piece of content a week and base all of your social media content for that week off what you've already done on your long form content. So that's a strategy that works really well. I definitely recommend everyone needs to be looking at some form of long form content. Now, my next lesson is that if you're not willing to create and build something and do the work to create and build that thing without an audience, then you never will have an audience. You have to go through that difficult period where nobody is listening, where nobody is reaching out and saying, hey, I'm seeing what you're doing and it's amazing. Sometimes it's going to feel like you're talking into that void, and it still does in some cases. And every other podcaster I've spoken to has said that they feel the same, that sometimes you feel like you're talking a lot and no one's really responding, but then it will come back in waves, right? But if you're not willing to go through that uncomfortable feeling of people aren't responding to me, no one's listening, then you'll never get to the point where people actually start telling you that they're listening or start buying straight from your episodes. This isn't particularly related to just a podcast. It's related to launching a course. It's growing an audience online. And actually, one of the reasons I created this podcast is because I seriously did lack in the audience department. I needed to solve that problem. And now 100 episodes later, I am in a position where I have an asset that is hugely valuable, has become hugely valuable to my business. But I never would have got there if I wasn't willing to build without an audience. So how does this apply to you? I just want to ask you a question is, what are you avoiding because you think that nobody cares or nobody is listening? Because sure, that could actually be true when you're starting out. But are you prepared to sit with that uncomfortable feeling? And are you prepared to keep going until people do start listening? Something that one of my coaches recently shared with me was a quote that says, I'm going to show up until they show up. And I absolutely love that. And I think that is something that I have done with this podcast. So where can you do that too? Where can you show up until people start showing up with you? Sometimes it's just about knowing that it's a phase. And even if it feels uncomfortable, keeping going through that. Now, the next lesson is that consistency really does matter. I think we went through a period of time there where consistency was actually quite optional. If we're thinking back to during the pandemic, everyone was at home, everyone was doing online learning, online businesses were absolutely blowing up. overnight. And I have to say those businesses that did blow up during that time, they were all consistent, right? But you could still be reasonably successful online, just showing up when and whenever you felt like it. And it was kind of optional. And also heaps of people were like, it was so much easier back then that people were like, you only need to do this and you'll get that. I think we're not in that time period anymore. And we're definitely not in it right now. And I think that no matter what you're doing or aiming for in this world, showing up again and again is the key to getting results. And I just really can't get over the similarities between going to the gym and creating your online business. Like if you only go to the gym once a week, you're going to get once a week results. You're probably going to get no results actually. But if you go to the gym 4-5 times a week, then you're going to get much faster results. If you have expert support, nutrition, doing the right exercises, actually doing the right exercises that are suited to your goals, then you are going to get where you want to go so much faster, right? Because you're moving in the right direction. And it's the same in business. If you show up more often and you put in the work, but not only that, you put in the strategic work that's actually perfect for you, that is geared to getting you the results that you actually want, then you're going to get further, so much faster by doing the right thing and being consistent. I'm only really sharing this is because I went through this massive journey, especially around the time I learnt my human design, all of that kind of stuff. And I had coaches who were telling me, oh, don't worry about consistency. Consistency is the thing that really puts people out of alignment. And that's why people burn out. And I actually don't believe that anymore, but I definitely went through the period of time where I was quite influenced by that. And I think we all kind of wish, or wouldn't it be nice if we didn't have to be consistent and we'd get the results? And yeah, back in those days, you could be a lot less consistent and still get pretty good results, but we are not in that phase anymore. But also looking back to then, if people were more consistent, not anyone in particular, but hypothetically, if someone was more consistent, imagine what they would have achieved versus just like okay results being less consistent. So the truth is consistency really does matter. And I think this applies to anything that you want in life. Showing up again and again is the key to getting results. So this also ties in with that one about the quality versus quantity. Like quantity is something that you need to step through in order to get to quality. And the only way that you're going to get to that quantity output is to actually be consistent. This doesn't mean it needs to be perfect, right? And with this podcast, I have talked about consistency a lot. And if you've been a long-time listener, you know that it's something that does not really come naturally to me, but then also it does, right? So I am not someone who has an episode out at 9 a.m. on a Tuesday every single week. And I'm sure you've noticed that. And I have tried so hard to do that, but yet I am consistently putting out episodes. More so recently, I'm consistently putting out episodes, and no matter what, even if I have a few weeks break, I am coming back to this. And that is consistency in its own way. So consistency does matter. If I had let a few weeks off here and there really stop me from coming back at all, or like getting in my head that I'll be judged for not being consistent enough or whatever, then I wouldn't be where I am right now on episode 108. So consistency does not need to be perfect, but you just need to keep coming back to it, whatever that is, over and over again. And I think what I've noticed is that the consistency piece actually gets easier as you get systems in place. So my next lesson is that using little hacks to get things done is really, really useful, and you need to find your hacks for actually getting things done. So one of the hacks that I use for this podcast, especially when I'm batching episodes, I have found that batching in particular for a podcast is so useful, because doing one episode a week I find quite a lot more difficult. And I think that batching in podcast episodes is actually way easier than batching social media content, for example. But finding the little hacks that work for me, one of them is around batching. And that is actually closing my eyes and visualizing how good it is going to feel when I've got future episodes batched in advance. Now, how I do this is I actually close my eyes and I think of my podcast host. I use Buzzsprout, and I get so clear that I visualize in my mind my Buzzsprout dashboard, and it is filled up with at least 4 episodes. And then I really sit with how amazing that is going to feel in my body and my nervous system when I know that is in place. That is something that is useful to me. Maybe you're not a visualizer and that's okay, but you need to find your own little hacks in terms of things that are going to motivate you to get the work done. Okay, so what is that for you? It could be that you have to sit down and produce some lessons for your course and you've been dragging the chain a little bit on it. What is going to get you to actually want to do it? I actually learned this in my NLP training course. It is an NLP technique. I'm not sure what it's called, but it's around about stepping into the future and looking at what you want to achieve and then feeling those feelings right now. Once you do that, it's so much easier to go and take the action. So what are your little hacks that are going to get you from procrastination into momentum? That is mine, and it has worked for me so many times on this show. So the next one is that systems are absolutely key because they make your life so much easier. They reduce your stress, they reduce your time. And the thing is, you're not really going to have a system when you first start out because you're new to this, whatever it is. You have to do the thing first. You actually have to do it repetitively. You have to put out, in terms of quantity, you have to go for it. You have to show up with that consistency and repeat and repeat and repeat, probably quite a few times before you can really find your system. Okay, so for me, this looked like getting the first 10 episodes done and then looking back and being like, okay, what was hard? What didn't feel good? How can I streamline this? You can't streamline anything until you've actually done it a few times. Sure, you can start with someone else's system and see how that works for you. And then you can create your own system based on what works for you. So that is something that I have found very key. I have actually used a Trello board the whole time I've had this podcast, and that has been an absolute game changer. I actually feel like I might turn that into a product because I think it's something that many people would benefit from. If that's something that you want, let me know. Send me a DM on Instagram. I'd love to know if that's something that interests you as my podcast production system. But once you have those systems, everything gets easier. I think that systems are such a big part of the whole freedom lifestyle, the freedom business, the lifestyle business. Systems are something that you absolutely have to have in order to achieve what you want to achieve and not burn out and feel like you have real freedom in your life. So what systems do you have? What systems can you lean on? What systems could you actually, that are so streamlined that you could actually get someone else to do them for you? Those are the best systems to have. Now, the next lesson is that it is totally worth investing money into tools that will save you time. So there is time and there is money, and sometimes we have to use our money to buy back our time. I think that there is, like we always get told we need to outsource, but sometimes actually we can invest in much lower cost tools that are actually going to save a ton of time. So the tools that I use to create this podcast are Riverside. So that costs me around $45 a month Australian for the plan that I'm on. And this is a tool that saves me so much time, but it absolutely allows me to actually produce more, which is key as well. And the reason it helps me to produce more, because the plan I'm on, I get a full transcript. And then so the second tool that I use a lot for this podcast and something I've leaned into a lot in the last 6 months and has made this podcast so much easier to produce as a one-man band is ChatGPT. So I have been taking that transcript from Riverside and putting it into ChatGPT to produce other content, plus my show notes and all of that stuff really, really quickly. And when I stepped into that month where I did way more episodes, that was absolutely key and so worth the money, right? So those are the two that I think really changed the game for me, like I said, around that episode 85 to 100. And the reason is because the systems were actually, or the tools that I was using were actually saving me so much time and energy and effort. So Riverside is where you film the episodes. It's got like a recording studio. It's also where I do my guest interviews, that kind of thing. It gives me a full transcript. It also gives me short clips that I can then put onto social media. I can actually host all of the video recordings there as well, which means that I don't have to host them on my Google Drive or whatever, which takes up a lot of bandwidth. And you can actually run webinars at all sorts in Riverside. I actually don't use it for that. It is like where all of my content lives in terms of what I can edit and all of that kind of stuff. It's got a decent editor on it. And yeah, that $45 a month is absolutely worth it for me. And I actually used it earlier on in the piece and it wasn't that good at that point. And so I cancelled it and went back to doing it on GarageBand for a long time. I just recorded my podcast on GarageBand. And then I went back to Riverside. I actually went onto a higher plan, but in that time they had actually brought in a lot of AI functionality, which has absolutely changed the game for me. And now I would not leave again. Like, it is just so valuable to me in terms of the output that it can produce for me without actually having to hire someone else. So Riverside and ChatGPT are two things that have definitely made this podcast a lot easier for me to produce without having to hire anyone. So it's just me doing this show up to this point, right? And then I do use Buzzsprout for my host. That costs me around $20 a month. Yes, I could use a podcast host that is free, like Libsyn or something like that, and that would be fine. But I really just prefer Buzzsprout. I love good software and I feel like the user interface and stuff is really good and I can rely on it. It has a very, very good reputation. Those are the three tools that I use to produce this podcast. So all up, that comes to around about $70 a month, $70 to $80 a month. So that is like pretty economical really for what it can do for me, right? I really have toyed with getting help with this podcast and it is still something that I would do more for the more admin side of things or the menial things. And that's definitely something that's on my radar right now, actually. But the reason I haven't had to do that yet is because of these tools. They have made it so much easier for me to produce what I want to produce. So sometimes spending money to buy back your time is really, really beneficial to you. It means that you're able to be more consistent, like we spoke about more. It means that we're able to have a higher quantity of output, like we spoke about before, just by being able to do the things that we can't do by ourselves. So yeah. And as you know, I highly recommend Kajabi if you're a course business because it's going to it's going to give you the tools to do so much more in getting your course out there, launch your programs, all of that great stuff, okay? So having good software is key and it is so much more economical from a cost perspective than hiring help. I'm all for hiring help. I'm all for delegating 100%, but why would you delegate something that a soft piece of software can do for you? Or you can create a system that works. Now, the final lesson that I'm going to share with you today, this is lesson 10, is that to get good at something, you have to do the reps. And this is something that I really found kicked in around about episode 90, 95-ish. So I was like thinking to myself, I actually feel like I have improved so much in how I speak. And, I have been someone that's always really showed up on camera. When I had my marketing agency, when I had my SEO program way back in the day, this is one of the things that actually really allowed me to sell it was that I would get featured on interviews. I would show up live. I used to do so many live streams. That used to be something that I really, really did a lot of. And actually, I feel like I need to do more of that now. So it's not like I've never done speaking, but I feel like the repetition of doing nearly 100 episodes has resulted in me improving so much as a speaker and becoming a lot more confident in speaking, a lot better at being able to clarify my thoughts and communicate. And of course, it's not always perfect. But sometimes to build the skill, you need to do something again and again and again. Like you can't expect an amazing podcast on episode 1 in terms of like sound quality. You may not have the right equipment. You may not, obviously you don't have a process. You're just kind of winging it at that point unless you just outsource it right from the start. And I don't really know why you would do that. But yeah, I just think that we've just got to put in more reps before we expect the big results. And getting good at something actually takes that quantity and it takes that consistency. And there's no way that you can get around this. And this absolutely applies to launching your online course. I have said many times on this podcast, your first launch is actually not that meaningful, but you've got to do the first launch in order to get to the second launch. You've got to do the second launch before you get to the third launch. But you're not actually going to get those results if you don't first get really proficient in whatever you're doing. Like with launching, you're going to get better every single launch you do. The first launch might feel quite wobbly. It might feel like quite like you feel like you don't know what you're doing and you're just kind of winging it. That's okay, because by the 5th launch, you're actually going to know what works for you, what parts of launching you love, what parts of launching you don't. And if you're relaunching the same product, which is definitely something I recommend, then you're going to know what works in terms of selling that to your audience as well. And then you're just rinsing and repeating, and life gets a lot easier. So you're actually getting more skilled in launching. Same for this podcast. I feel like the more I talk on this podcast, the better I get at speaking, the more succinct I get. And a lot of that actually has come down to also improving my gear. Like I've had 3 or 4 microphones during this period, and now I've got one that I think really works well for me. And it's taken a while to get there. It's taken a few bad investments, but that's irrelevant. It doesn't even matter, because at the end of the day, I've gotten to the result that I wanted, which was 100 episodes, but I'm definitely not stopping there. So those are the 10 lessons. I hope that you took something from those. And yeah, I have absolutely loved showing up on this podcast and creating the content, coming up with the content, and actually getting on the mic and speaking to you. I absolutely love it, actually. It just works for me. And maybe a podcast isn't for you, but what is the right thing for you? Is it writing? Is it short form? Although I do really highly recommend that you have some kind of long form content in your business. What does that look like for you? And building that up to the point where it becomes an asset for you is invaluable. I cannot stress that enough. So this podcast has become a huge asset to my business, right? It's the same with building a YouTube channel, building an email list. Like I would actually say that building an email list is super, super, super valuable because you own it, whereas something like a YouTube channel, you don't. But having a YouTube channel, even like a big Instagram following or on Facebook, wherever you hang out, right? That work that you put in is never wasted as long as you stay reasonably consistent. By that, I mean that you can't not take breaks. You may even like go through a stage where you just need to rest and have 3 months off, and that's okay because that audience is never going to disappear. But having assets in your business is absolutely key. And one of the biggest assets that you can ever create in your business is an online course or some kind of digital offer that you can sell without you having to personally deliver it. So build these assets in your business. You will never regret it. You'll absolutely never regret it. And at the start, when I started from podcast 0 to now episode 108, did I think that I would get there? It felt so big to ever get to 100 episodes, which, as I shared before, was my goal initially. I didn't think I would get there. Sometimes I felt like giving up. I really wanted to bow out at times, especially in those early days where the download numbers were low. Luckily, and I do think I mentioned this in this episode, what I learned from the first 50 episodes was that I had been told by someone I know in my business network she's got an agency where she actually manages a lot of the podcasting for businesses. So she told me that don't expect results for at least 6 months because that's just how podcasting is. So I had that knowledge before I dove into it. And I think that actually really helped me because I did not have unrealistic expectations. And sometimes I feel like, I could sell the dream to you a lot more about getting instant results from an online course, for example. But the reality is that you do need to rinse and repeat to really start to see the true benefits. And I know that knowledge from that podcast expert really helped me. So maybe that knowledge is going to help you as well. That realistically is going to take more than just showing up a few times. And so many people bow out of podcasting because of that, because they're not seeing the results straight away. In a way, it has been all about proving to myself that I could do it. And I've done that now, which is so valuable as well. But also now I have this asset. And like I said before, people are interested in this asset. Like I have people pitching me, and I am looking at bringing on more guests. I've actually got a guest interview coming up next week. And yeah, I just think that it's easy to look at someone who has something like an asset or a successful course or something like that and thinking like, how did she or he get so lucky, or they have that and I don't have it, so I shouldn't even try, and all of that kind of thing. But the reality is that whoever has that thing, that asset, put in the work to get there, and you too can very much have the same by doing the thing over and over again. That is what it comes down to. a lot of the time. So I hope you enjoyed this episode. I would love to hear what your main takeaways are. Just message me on Instagram, DM me at @LouBlakely_. My DMs are always open. I always love to hear that you're listening, that you loved an episode. It definitely makes me so happy. Like, I cannot even emphasize enough how true that is. And that is something that I have noticed more and more. The more episodes I've done, the longer I've been doing this, as I do start to get more of those episodes. But for a long time, I did not get those messages. But I highly value them. And I don't think that will ever get old. I absolutely love when people say they listen to my podcast and they love it. It makes me so happy. And it actually makes me want to keep going. So yeah, I'm also open to any feedback as well. If you would love to hear about a particular topic, or you would like a different format or anything like that, then definitely let me know as well. I'm always keen to hear more from you. So I hope you enjoyed that episode. Have a great week, and I will see you next week with a special guest interview. Bye. Thanks, course creators and go-getters. You're incredible, and I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you haven't done so already, make sure you hit subscribe in your podcast app so you don't miss an episode. If you'd like to find out more about what I offer, head across to loublakely.com. See you next time.